The old house stood silently at the edge of the village, a relic of a bygone era. Its weathered wooden exterior, covered in a thick layer of moss, seemed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding forest. The air around it was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a constant reminder of the passage of time. A narrow path, barely visible through the overgrown foliage, led to the front door, which hung slightly askew on rusted hinges. The house had been abandoned for decades, its history shrouded in mystery and whispers of tragedy. No one in the village dared to venture near, especially after sundown. The few who had claimed to hear strange noises coming from within, a low, mournful wailing that sent shivers down their spines. It was said that the house was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who had once lived there. Two friends, Yuki and Taro, both in their early 30s, were inexplicably drawn to the house. They had known each other since childhood and shared a fascination with the supernatural. Their curiosity had led them to explore numerous abandoned places, but none had affected them as deeply as this house. Yuki was a writer, always in search of new material for her stories. Her dark, shoulder-length hair framed a face that was both delicate and determined. Taro, on the other hand, was a photographer, his camera always slung over his shoulder. He had a tall, lean frame and a calm demeanor that often belied his intense curiosity. One crisp autumn afternoon, the two friends stood at the edge of the path, gazing up at the house. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the ground. "We should go in before it gets too dark," Yuki suggested, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Taro nodded, adjusting the strap of his camera. "Let's get this over with. Maybe we'll finally uncover the truth about this place." As they approached the front door, a chill wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves and making the house seem almost alive. Yuki pushed the door open, its creak echoing through the silent halls. The interior was dimly lit, the only light coming from the dusty windows that filtered the dying sunlight. They stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under their weight. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rot, and an unsettling silence enveloped them. The foyer was cluttered with remnants of the past, old furniture covered in sheets, broken picture frames, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance, their breath visible in the cold, damp air. "Let's start with the main floor," Taro suggested, raising his camera to capture the decaying grandeur of the house. They moved cautiously through the rooms, each one more decrepit than the last. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floors were littered with debris. In the living room, they found an old piano, its keys yellowed and cracked. Yuki ran her fingers over them, a discordant note echoing through the room. "It's like time stopped here," she murmured, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of what had happened. Taro nodded, snapping photos of the eerie scene. After exploring the main floor, they decided to head to the basement. The entrance was a narrow door at the end of a dark hallway, partially obscured by a fallen bookshelf. They managed to move it aside, revealing a steep staircase leading down into the darkness. A musty, almost oppressive smell wafted up from below, making Yuki wrinkle her nose in distaste. "Ready?" Taro asked, his voice low. Yuki nodded, gripping the flashlight tightly. "Let's go." The stairs creaked ominously as they descended, each step echoing in the confined space. The basement was even darker than the rest of the house, the only light coming from their flashlights. The air was colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over them like a heavy blanket. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a large, open space filled with old furniture boxes and other forgotten items. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the walls were damp with moisture. They moved slowly, their flashlights sweeping over the clutter. Yuki stopped suddenly, her light catching something unusual on the far wall. "Taro, look at this," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Taro joined her, his flashlight revealing a large, old mirror mounted on the wall. Its surface was covered in dust and grime, but there was something unsettling about it. Why would someone put a mirror down here? He wondered aloud, reaching out to wipe away the dirt. As he did, a chill ran down his spine, and he pulled his hand back as if burned. "Did you feel that?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Yuki nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "It's like there's something behind it." They both stared at the mirror, their reflections distorted and ghostly in the dim light. Suddenly, the mirror seemed to shimmer, and a faint, almost imperceptible movement caught their attention. A shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, seemed to shift behind the glass. Yuki gasped, stepping back instinctively. "What is that?" she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. Taro shook his head, unable to tear his eyes away from the mirror. "I don't know, but we need to find out." He reached into his bag, pulling out a small crowbar. "We should see if we can move it," he suggested, his voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at his insides. Yuki nodded, her grip on the flashlight tightening. Together, they began to pry the mirror from the wall, the ancient nails giving way with a series of sharp, metallic creaks. As the mirror came loose, a cold, malevolent energy seemed to seep from the wall behind it, chilling them to the bone. The mirror clattered to the floor, revealing a hidden alcove behind it. Inside the alcove was a small wooden door, its surface covered in strange, intricate carvings. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance, their curiosity battling with their growing sense of dread. "Should we open it?" Yuki asked, her voice barely audible. Taro hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, we have to. We need to know what's behind this." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he grasped the door handle. It was cold to the touch, and a sense of unease washed over him. With a deep breath, he turned the handle and pulled the door open. A rush of icy air greeted them, and they peered into the darkness beyond. The small room was empty, save for a single, old chest in the center. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, its metal fittings tarnished with age. "Let's see what's inside," Yuki suggested, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. They approached the chest cautiously, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Taro knelt down, his hands shaking as he lifted the lid. Inside, they found a collection of old documents, photographs, and personal items, all neatly arranged as if someone had placed them there with great care. Yuki picked up one of the photographs, her eyes widening in shock. "Taro, look at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Taro glanced at the photo, his blood running cold. It was a picture of the house, taken many years ago. In the foreground stood a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children. But what caught their attention was the figure standing in the background, almost hidden in the shadows. It was a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes, its presence sending a shiver down their spines. "Who is that?" Taro asked, his voice filled with dread. Yuki shook her head, her eyes fixed on the photograph. "I don't know, but I think we've found the source of the haunting." They continued to sift through the contents of the chest, uncovering more photographs, letters, and personal items. Each piece seemed to add to the growing sense of unease that filled the room. As they pieced together the story of the family who had once lived in the house, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The family had moved to the house in the early 1900s, hoping to start a new life away from the bustling city. But from the very beginning, strange things had begun to happen. Objects would move on their own, strange noises echoed through the halls, and the children claimed to see a dark figure lurking in the shadows. Despite their best efforts to ignore the disturbances, the family's fear grew with each passing day. The father, a stern and practical man, refused to believe in the supernatural. He insisted that there was a logical explanation for everything. But as the weeks turned into months, his skepticism began to waver. The final entry in the father's journal, found at the bottom of the chest, detailed the family's last, desperate attempt to escape the house. They had packed their belongings and were preparing to leave when the dark figure appeared, blocking their path. The journal ended abruptly, the last words scrawled in a shaky hand. "It won't let us leave." Yuki and Taro stared at the journal, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We need to get out of here," Taro said, his voice trembling. Yuki nodded, her fear mirrored in his eyes. "Yes, before it's too late." They hurried back up the stairs, their flashlights casting frantic beams of light in the darkness. As they reached the top, they heard a low, guttural growl coming from the basement. They didn't stop to look back, rushing out of the house and into the safety of the daylight. As they stood outside, catching their breath, they glanced back at the house, its dark windows seeming to watch them. "We need to tell someone about this," Yuki said, her voice shaky. Taro nodded, his face pale. "Yes, but who would believe us?" They knew that they had uncovered something truly terrifying, something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As they walked away from the house, the sun dipping below the horizon, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The house, with its dark secrets and malevolent presence, would always be a part of their lives, a reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. Yuki and Taro had spent the night restless and haunted by their experiences in the old house. The photographs and journal entries they had discovered weighed heavily on their minds, their sleep plagued by nightmares of the dark figure. By morning, they knew they had to return to the house, to uncover more of its secrets. The sunlight did little to dispel the sense of dread that had settled over them. They met at a small cafe in the village to discuss their plan. The other patrons cast curious glances at them, their hushed conversations, a stark contrast to the intensity of Yuki and Taro's discussion. "We need to find out more about the family that lived there," Yuki said, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped her coffee. Taro nodded, his eyes dark with determination. "I agree. There must be records or someone who remembers them." They decided to visit the village library first, hoping to find old newspapers or documents that might shed light on the house's history. The library was a quaint old building, its shelves filled with dusty tomes and yellowed papers. The librarian, a kind elderly woman, greeted them with a warm smile. "We're looking for information about the old house on the edge of the village," Yuki explained. The librarian's smile faltered slightly, and a shadow passed over her face. "That house has a dark history," she said quietly. "But if you're determined, I can show you where to look." She led them to a back room filled with old newspapers and records. "These go back decades," she explained. "You might find what you're looking for here." Yuki and Taro spent hours poring over the old documents, their fingers growing black with ink and dust. Finally, they found a series of articles that detailed the tragic history of the family who had lived in the house. The family, named Tanaka, had moved to the village in the early 1900s. Mr. Tanaka had been a successful businessman in Tokyo, but after a series of personal tragedies, he had decided to move his family to the countryside for a fresh start. From the beginning, the family had experienced strange occurrences in the house. The villagers had whispered about it, but Mr. Tanaka had dismissed their superstitions. As the years went by, the strange events escalated. Objects moved on their own, eerie sounds echoed through the halls, and the children spoke of seeing a dark figure in the shadows. The articles detailed the family's growing desperation and their unsuccessful attempts to leave the house. The final article was a brief, chilling account of the family's disappearance. One night, they had vanished without a trace, leaving the house abandoned. The villagers believed the house was cursed, and no one had dared to live there since. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance, the weight of the history pressing down on them. "We need to go back," Yuki said quietly. "We need to find out what happened to them." Taro nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Yes, we can't leave this unresolved." They returned to the house as the sun was beginning to set, the shadows lengthening and deepening around them. The house seemed to loom larger, its presence more oppressive than before. With a deep breath, they stepped inside, the air immediately colder and more stifling. They made their way back to the basement, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The small room with the chest seemed even more ominous in the fading light. They knelt by the chest, their breath visible in the cold air. "We missed something," Taro said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There must be more here." They carefully examined the chest and the alcove, looking for any hidden compartments or clues. As they worked, a low, guttural growl echoed through the basement, freezing them in place. Yuki's heart pounded in her chest, and she glanced at Taro, his face pale with fear. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Taro shook his head, his eyes wide. "I don't know, but we need to be careful." They continued their search, the sense of dread growing with each passing moment. Finally, Yuki found a loose floorboard near the chest. She pried it up, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was an old, leather-bound book. Yuki carefully lifted it out, her hands shaking. "This must be important," she said, opening the book. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, drawings, and diagrams. It seemed to be a journal, but not like the one they had found before. This one appeared to be a record of the strange occurrences and attempts to understand and counteract the dark presence in the house. As they read through the journal, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The Tanaka family had realized too late that the house was haunted by a malevolent spirit. The journal detailed their desperate attempts to rid the house of the entity, including various rituals and protective measures. None of them had worked, and the family's fear had grown with each passing day. The final entries were the most chilling. They described the increasing aggression of the entity and the family's realization that they were trapped. The last entry was a desperate plea for help. The words scrawled in a shaky hand, "It won't let us leave. We are prisoners in our own home." Yuki and Taro sat in stunned silence, the weight of the journal's contents pressing down on them. "We need to do something," Yuki said finally, her voice shaking. "We can't just leave it like this." Taro nodded, his face set with determination. "We need to find a way to free the house from this entity." They spent the next few hours carefully studying the journal, trying to understand the rituals and protective measures described within. It was clear that the entity was powerful and malevolent, and that they would need to be careful. As they prepared to leave the basement, the low growl echoed through the room again, louder and more menacing this time. They froze, their flashlights flickering as a cold wind swept through the basement. The dark figure appeared in the doorway, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Yuki and Taro backed away slowly, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We need to get out of here," Yuki whispered, her voice trembling. Taro nodded, his eyes fixed on the figure. "Let's go now." They hurried up the stairs, the figure following them, its presence growing more oppressive with each step. As they reached the top, they slammed the door shut, their breath coming in ragged gasps. "We can't stay here," Taro said, his voice shaking. "We need to find someone who can help us." Yuki nodded, her face pale with fear. "Yes, but who?" They knew that they needed to find someone with knowledge of the supernatural, someone who could help them understand and defeat the entity. As they left the house, the dark figure watched them from the window, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They had uncovered the house's dark history, but they knew that their journey was far from over. The entity was powerful, and they would need all the help they could get to free the house from its grasp. The village was quiet as they walked through the streets, the houses dark and silent. Yuki and Taro knew that they were racing against time, and that they would need to find help quickly. Their search for answers had led them to the edge of terror, and they knew that the worst was yet to come. The following morning, Yuki and Taro awoke with a sense of urgency. The haunting presence of the entity from the house lingered in their minds. They knew they needed help, and their first stop was the home of an elderly woman named Keiko, renowned in the village for her knowledge of the supernatural. Keiko's house was a small, traditional Japanese home, nestled among ancient cherry blossom trees. As they approached, the soft scent of the blossoms filled the air, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the haunted house. Keiko greeted them at the door, her wise eyes filled with understanding. "I knew you would come," she said softly, her voice a soothing balm to their frazzled nerves. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance before stepping inside. Keiko led them to a small, cozy room, filled with the scent of incense and the soft glow of candlelight. They sat around a low table, and Keiko poured tea for them, her movements graceful and deliberate. After a moment of silence, Yuki spoke. "We need your help, Keiko-san. The house on the edge of the village. It's haunted, and we don't know how to deal with it." Keiko nodded, her expression serious. "I have heard of that house. It is said to be cursed by a powerful spirit. Tell me everything you know." Yuki and Taro recounted their experiences in the house, the eerie occurrences, and the dark figure that had followed them. They showed her the photographs and the journals they had found, and Keiko listened intently, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the information. When they finished, she sat in thoughtful silence for a moment before speaking. "The spirit you encountered is indeed powerful. It is not just a ghost, but an ornery, a vengeful spirit. It is tied to that place by a deep and terrible anger. If you are to rid the house of this spirit, you must first understand its pain and suffering." Yuki and Taro listened intently, the gravity of Keiko's words sinking in. "How do we do that?" Taro asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Keiko looked at them with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "We must perform a ritual to communicate with the spirit. Only then can we understand its torment and find a way to appease it." She stood and moved to a small shrine in the corner of the room, retrieving a set of ancient scrolls and ritual tools. "This will not be easy," she warned, "and it will be dangerous, but it is the only way." Yuki and Taro nodded, their determination unwavering. They had come this far, and they were not about to turn back now. As the sun began to set, they prepared for the ritual. Keiko instructed them on what to do, explaining each step with meticulous detail. They gathered the necessary items: candles, incense, sacred talismans, and a small, ornate mirror. Keiko led them to the house under the cover of darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The house loomed before them, its dark windows like empty eyes watching their approach. Inside, the atmosphere was even more oppressive than before, the air thick with a malevolent energy. They set up the ritual space in the main room, placing the candles and incense in a circle around them. Keiko began to chant softly, her voice a soothing counterpoint to the growing sense of dread. Yuki and Taro held the mirror between them, their reflections wavering in the candlelight. As the chant grew louder, the air around them seemed to vibrate with energy. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the room. The dark figure appeared, its glowing eyes fixed on them with a malevolent intensity. Keiko's chant reached a crescendo, and the figure seemed to waver, its form flickering in and out of existence. Yuki and Taro tightened their grip on the mirror, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We are here to help you," Keiko called out, her voice strong and steady. "Show us your pain, so we may understand and free you from your torment." The figure hesitated, then began to shift and change. The room around them seemed to melt away, replaced by vision of the past. They found themselves standing in the same house, but it was no longer decayed and abandoned. It was alive with the sights and sounds of a family. They saw Mr. Tanaka, a stern yet kind-looking man, and his wife, a gentle woman with a warm smile. Their 2 children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. But there was something else, a shadow lurking at the edges of the vision, growing darker and more menacing with each passing moment. The family's happiness was tinged with fear, their joy overshadowed by an unspoken dread. The vision shifted, showing them the family's descent into terror. They saw the strange occurrences that had plagued the house, the objects moving on their own, the eerie sounds, and the dark figure that appeared in the shadows. The family's fear grew, their once happy home, becoming a place of horror and despair. The vision culminated in the Families' desperate attempt to escape, the dark figure blocking their path. They watched in horror as the family was trapped, their pleas for help echoing through the house. The vision faded, leaving Yuki, Taro, and Keiko standing in the cold, dark room once more. The dark figure remained, but its malevolence had shifted to a deep, abiding sorrow. "You were wronged," Keiko said softly, her voice filled with compassion. "We understand your pain. We are here to help you find peace." The figure seemed to waver, its form flickering as if caught between two worlds. Keiko stepped forward, holding out a sacred talisman. "Release your anger. Find the peace you deserve." The figure reached out, its dark hand closing around the talisman. There was a blinding flash of light, and the room was filled with a warm, soothing energy. When the light faded, the figure was gone, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. Yuki and Taro breathed a sigh of relief, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. "Is it over?" Yuki asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keiko nodded, her face pale but calm. "Yes, the spirit has found peace. The house is no longer cursed." They left the house, the night air cool and refreshing. As they walked back to the village, they felt a sense of closure and relief. The entity that had haunted the house for so long was finally at rest. Back at Keiko's home, they thanked her profusely for her help. "We couldn't have done it without you," Taro said, his voice filled with gratitude. Keiko smiled, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. The spirits of the past are powerful, but with understanding and compassion. Even the deepest wounds can be healed. Yuki and Taro returned to their homes, their minds filled with the events of the past days. They knew they had been part of something extraordinary, something that would stay with them forever. As they lay in their beds that night, they felt a sense of peace, knowing that the house and the spirit within it were finally at rest. The village returned to its quiet routine, the whispers of the haunted house fading into memory. But Yuki and Taro knew that they would never forget what they had experienced. The house, once a place of fear and despair, had been transformed into a symbol of hope and redemption. And as they moved forward, they carried with them the lessons they had learned, the knowledge that even the darkest of spirits could find peace in the light of understanding and compassion. The village was quiet, but the events of the past days weighed heavily on Yuki and Taro. Although the malevolent spirit had found peace, the sense of closure they had hoped for eluded them. They felt a lingering unease, as if the house still held secrets waiting to be uncovered. The morning after the ritual, Yuki awoke with a start. She had dreamed of the house again, but this time it was different. In her dream, she had seen a small, hidden room beneath the basement, a place they had not yet explored. The memory of the dream was vivid, the details sharp and clear in her mind. She knew she had to go back. Taro shared her resolve. Despite their exhaustion, they decided to return to the house one last time. The journey back to the house was silent, the weight of their task pressing down on them. The house stood as they had left it, but its presence seemed different, almost expectant. They made their way to the basement, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The small room where they had found the chest seemed even more oppressive, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. Yuki led Taro to the spot she had seen in her dream, a small area near the far wall. She knelt down, her hands trembling as she felt along the floorboards. There, hidden beneath a layer of dust and debris, was a small, concealed trapdoor. Her heart pounded as she pried it open, revealing a narrow, dark passage leading deeper underground. "We have to go down," Yuki said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Taro nodded, his face pale but determined. "Let's finish this." They descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The passage was narrow, the walls close and suffocating. Their flashlights revealed old, crumbling bricks and the occasional scurrying of small creatures. The passage opened into a small, hidden chamber, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. In the center of the chamber was a small altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. On the altar lay an old worn book and a small ornate box. Yuki approached the altar, her flashlight illuminating the ancient symbols carved into the stone. She opened the book, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. It was a diary, written by a woman named Akiko Tanaka, the wife of the family they had seen in the vision. The diary detailed the family's descent into terror, but it also revealed something they had not known. Akiko had discovered that the spirit haunting the house was not just a vengeful entity, but the spirit of her own husband. Twisted and corrupted by anger and pain, he had been consumed by the dark energy of the house, becoming a malevolent force that tormented his own family. Akiko had tried to save him, to perform a ritual to free his spirit, but she had failed. Her last entry was a desperate plea for forgiveness, her final words, a heartbreaking farewell to her children. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance, the weight of Akiko's words pressing down on them. "We need to finish what she started," Taro said, his voice filled with determination. Yuki nodded, her resolve firm. "We need to free his spirit, once and for all." They examined the altar and the box, finding the items necessary to perform the ritual. Keiko had taught them well, and they knew what they had to do. They began the ritual, their voices steady as they chanted the ancient words. The air around them seemed to vibrate with energy, the temperature dropping sharply. As they continued the chant, the chamber filled with a blinding light. The dark figure of Mr. Tanaka appeared before them, his eyes glowing with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "We are here to help you," Yuki said, her voice strong and steady. "We understand your pain. Let us free you from your torment." The figure hesitated, then began to waver, its form flickering in the light. With a final, powerful chant, Yuki and Taro completed the ritual. The figure let out a low, mournful wail, then began to dissolve, the dark energy dissipating into the light. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Yuki and Taro stood in the quiet, their hearts pounding with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," Taro said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yuki nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, it's finally over." They made their way back up the passage, the weight of their task lifted from their shoulders. As they emerged into the basement, the house seemed different, its dark presence gone. The air was lighter, the oppressive energy dissipated. They left the house for the last time, the morning light casting long shadows as they walked away. Back in the village, they were greeted with a mixture of curiosity and relief. The villagers had sensed the change, the lifting of the dark energy that had plagued their house for so long. Keiko welcomed them back with a warm smile, her eyes filled with pride. "You have done well," she said, her voice gentle. "The spirit is at peace, and the house is free." Yuki and Taro thanked her, their hearts filled with gratitude. They knew they had been part of something extraordinary, something that would stay with them forever. The house, once a place of fear and despair, had been transformed into a symbol of hope and redemption. As they moved forward, they carried with them the lessons they had learned, the knowledge that even the darkest of spirits could find peace in the light of understanding and compassion. The village returned to its quiet routine, the whispers of the haunted house fading into memory, but Yuki and Taro knew that they would never forget what they had experienced. Their bond had been forged in the fires of fear and determination, and they emerged stronger, their spirits unbroken. The old house stood silent once more, its secrets revealed and its spirits at rest. The cherry blossoms swayed gently in the breeze, a promise of renewal and peace. Yuki and Taro stood together, their hands intertwined, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, knowing that they had the strength to overcome them. The past had been laid to rest, and with it, a new dawn had risen. The house and the spirits within would remain a part of their story, a testament to the power of compassion, understanding, and the unbreakable bond of friendship.